Good morning, everyone. Today's reading from Luke, it's not one of those Jesus stories that makes you feel all warm inside. I've never seen bumper stickers or house decorations from this passage in Luke 13. Not a single kitchen plaque emblazoned with the story of Pilate mixing blood with sacrifices. There's mixing. It seems like a perfect opportunity for marketing. There's no pillows, hashtag Tower of Siloam. There's no garden decor threatening the produce. Though I think I know someone who's usually here on a Sunday morning who might consider some biblical encouragement for their own fig tree. But even the handful of semi-threatening and judgmental signs and billboards that you see while you drive down the highway, ones like Jesus is watching, they don't seem to farm their inspiration from this particular set of verses. These words just aren't a source of comfort for most people. If you do find comfort or satisfaction here, it is likely because you're thinking of someone else who deserves this warning. There's a whole nother sermon on splinters and logs for another day. Bottom line is, when Jesus starts talking like this, we just don't know what to do with him. Sometimes we use these kinds of passages to lash out at others, often bringing rightfully earned criticisms of hypocrisy and judgmentalism on ourselves when we do. And other times, we just choose to ignore these parts. There's parts in your Gospels that just, well, we know they're there, but they don't make it into our reading plans for the year. Or they go unhighlighted in our Bibles. I know many of you are note takers. But I imagine as you flip through the Gospel of Luke, some sections have more notes than others, and this one probably is a little more barren than most. We don't hear these kinds of passages very often in our worship either. And I don't necessarily blame any of you for doing that in this case. I'm not upset that you don't decorate your home with Luke 13, 1 through 9, or put it on your car. I completely understand. Though I guess you could if you wanted to make a bumper sticker out of repent or perish. That might work. But if all we do with this passage is ignore it, the bare minimum, then we can never come to understand it. We will certainly never be able to mine its wisdom or apply it to our lives in any capacity. So let's give it one chance this morning, see what happens. First things first, there's some weird historical stuff going on. Jesus mentions two current events, current for the time, that we just don't know a whole lot about. There's a story about Pilate mixing the blood of Galileans with the sacrifices, and there's a story of the Tower of Siloam falling down on 18 people. There are some other kind of similar stories that are documented in historical writings, but these two events, as Jesus presents them, only know them from the Gospels. Not even all of them, just Luke. We can't elaborate on them with other materials like we can other events. There's a lack of evidence. Now, this lack of evidence doesn't make the events any less true. It just means that we're kind of out of the loop here. This is one of those times that Jesus mentions something to the crowd that they all clearly understand and know what he's talking about, but we don't. It's like a reverse parable in that way, I guess. With the parables, it was common for people hearing them in the moment to not understand anything Jesus was talking about. But we, 2,000 years later, have had a chance to study, analyze, and pick them apart, and can usually explain the parables a couple different ways into the next Sunday. But here we have the reverse. Crowds know what Jesus is talking about with this Tower of Siloam and this blood mixed with sacrifice, but we don't know anything about that other than what we have in these short couple of sentences. But let's not let our lack of knowledge stand in the way of wisdom. Even if we don't know the story apart from the headline is enough for us to figure out what Jesus is trying to say. Jesus is using two recent events, two tragic events, to make a point about random, non-discriminatory suffering. He does this in two parts, two moves. First, Jesus reminds the crowd that the 18 people who died, Tower of Siloam, when it fell presumably on them, did not die because they were worse sinners than anyone else. It was a random event. They were not being singled out by the hand of God. Similarly, Pilate mixing the blood of the Galileans with the sacrifices was also non-discriminatory. Though it sounds like it is. It sounds like this is Roman hatred on Galileans. It sounds racial, and to some degree it is. But it's non-discriminatory in the sense of what God is up to in this moment, in this story. Pilate chose some to kill and to mix their blood with the sacrifice, but that doesn't mean they deserve to die more than someone else. For Jesus to need to say that, though, implies that someone else was out there arguing that perhaps these people who died deserved it. You don't say things like this unless somebody else has already said the opposite. You can kind of reverse engineer the whole conversation, and Jesus is saying something because somebody else has already said something horrific, I think. There was, and is in some circles still today, a common misreading of Deuteronomy that can be interpreted to say that those who sin egregiously will pay for their sin with death. So when a tower falls, they explain the disaster by saying these people were being punished for their sins. How else do you explain this? It's a theological attempt to try to order the chaos around people, to understand the things that are ununderstandable. We still hear the same thing today when hurricanes make landfall or fires burn in Texas or tidal waves bury coastlands in water. People have a desire to try to make sense of these moments. And God is a very easy party to point a finger at. We even call these things acts of God. But Jesus rejects this notion. He plainly and simply dismisses the idea that God uses chaotic violence to punish the sins of the people. However, there is a plot twist. Rather than dismissing the logic of the masses with science or with the randomness of the universe, Jesus makes the case that these people who died were not worse sinners than anyone else. In other words, you can't tell Jesus that these people are punished for their sins, because if that were true, the Tower of Siloam would need to not only fall, but also steamroll all of Jerusalem and her neighbors. Pilate should have killed not just a few Galileans, but all of them. Since everyone is equally sinful, to explain random acts of violence and sinfulness means that we are all doomed to suffer the same fate. The tidal wave that hits Japan would need to level the whole world. The hurricane that makes landfall in the Gulf of Mexico would need to keep spinning until it makes landfall on all 7 continents. The volcano would need to cover the whole earth with lava, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Jesus doesn't try to rationalize people into being nice. He just simply tells them, by your own logic, you should all be dead. No wonder this doesn't make good bumper sticker material. Who wants to wake up and make their coffee and see a kitchen decoration that reminds them that they are terrible? This isn't motivational material. This isn't the feel-good kind of stuff here. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So if you want people punished death for their sins, it's going to be a bloody Sunday. Having now corrected, or at least pointing out how ridiculous the theological fallacy was, and having leveled the playing field, Jesus makes his second move and redirects the effort of the masses. Rather than trying to assign blame for the unexplainable atrocities of life, and rather than seeing logs in your neighbor's eyes, Jesus suggests that everyone should look inward at their own life and the kind of fruit they are producing. Blaming God and the sins of the people for a tower falling isn't going to make the tower stand up again. It's not going to undo what has happened. This line of thinking cannot produce any fruit. It cannot ever undo what has happened. It cannot make hurricanes retreat. It cannot make natural disasters go back to where they came from. It doesn't actually order the chaos to blame God. It just simply puts a Band-Aid over it, and not well. Understanding the whys of the universe will never undo the tragedies we endure. Understanding why there is a war in Ukraine doesn't make the war easier to understand, easier to swallow, doesn't make the pain less real, doesn't make the suffering less horrific. Our efforts instead are better directed toward trying to align ourselves with God's will, producing the fruit of righteousness rather than the fruit of sinfulness. So pointing toward a fig tree, Jesus encouraged all of us to self-reflect on the kind of fruit we are, or in the case of the fig tree, are not producing. And it's a chance for us to think of it as an opportunity for realignment. Trying out a new word, a new church word. Let's see what you think. Realignment. Most of you know by now I have a strong affinity for disliking church words. I think they cause confusion and often go undefined, and defining your terms is always the first thing you do. Church words often just create confusion. So of course I'm adding another one. Let's try out realignment and see what we think. You're all used to the word repent. It's not a fun word. It's kind of like when your doctor tells you you have high blood pressure. Repent's not a word you want to hear in the pew. Makes you feel very self-conscious. It's supposed to. That's what it's supposed to do. To repent is to do something different. Now, from the strictest point of view, repent in Hebrew means to turn around. It doesn't have any sort of moral connotation to it out of the box. It just means turn around. If you're trying to get somebody's attention who's walking down the street and they're not listening to you and you shout their name and they don't hear you, you might shout to turn around. Streets of ancient Israel, you could shout repent. That's all it means, turn back. It's a fine word, but over the years it's been kind of muddled with guilt and shame, and it's been kind of pumped full of expectation of something you shouldn't have done. So you should feel bad when someone tells you to repent. That's entirely true. For Jesus to say that we should repent or perish in this particular set of material, in this particular sermon, he is calling the people to turn around, to stop pointing their fingers at everyone else and instead turn them around. Turn the fingers towards yourself and figure out what your own mess is before you figure out somebody else's. I think at the core, that's what this is. But the problem I have with the church word repent is if it just means to turn around, we often miss the second half of what it means to repent. We think of repenting as to stop doing something. That's a great first step. Repent does mean stop going the direction you're going. But to turn around means also to redirect yourself a different direction. And if repent only means stop sinning, you never get around to doing the actual important bit of doing something productive, which is why this fig tree matters so much. Jesus isn't just calling the people to stop sinning. He's calling them to start living righteously. A redirection, or in this case, again, I'm going to try it out and kick the tires a little bit. I think it's a realignment. It's when you take your car into the shop because it's always going to the right or the left, and you have to have a mechanic flip a couple of switches and get your wheels pointing straight again. You need to go the right direction. It's not enough to not go the wrong direction. You have to go the right direction. It's not enough to know that your vehicle turns to the right so you hold the steering wheel more to the left. That's not enough. Repent is a realignment in the sense of you should be able to let go and go the right direction on its own. There's a directionality that matters. There's a compass point. There's a true north. There's some sort of knowing which way you're trying to go. It's not enough for a fig tree to grow every year. Getting taller isn't going to make the fig tree stronger or healthier. It needs to produce figs. It can't just sit there and not die. It has to do something productive. It's not enough for these people to stop pointing fingers at Pilate. They have to start figuring out whether or not they're living their lives the way that God called them to for themselves. It's not enough to notice back in your neighbor's eye. You have to remove the log in your own eye too. Not just know it's there. I think that's where the word repent goes wrong. Sometimes we think repenting means recognizing that I do have a log in my own eye, that I have a sin problem. Realignment means I've taken it out. I now wear corrective lenses to cover the damage. And I can see what I'm supposed to see the right way again. realignment. I think that these words from Luke 13 can be a good news. I don't think they're ever going to make decor, but I think they can be good news again. I think we can salvage something good from this. Jesus is not simply calling people out of sin, he's calling them into a way of righteousness. If you feel overwhelmed by a sense of guilt or shame when people tell you that you need to repent, I guess that's fine. But it's much more productive to be called into something better. When you hear words like repent, you should hear a call to something better, not just a call to sin and shame and guilt and fire and brimstone. It is never enough to simply stop doing what is wrong. It's always better to commit ourselves to doing what is right. And it's that second step, ever so tricky. So let me try to make it a little easier for you. I was given a nice little plug this morning that I'm now passing on to all of you, that we are still in the process of helping several refugee families from Afghanistan, one of which is fairly new in town, newer than the others, and they have some children that they would like to send to school this week. They don't know how to make heads or tails of school supply list and what they need and what they don't need. They need some help figuring that out. And I think that's something we could help with. It's one thing to know that there are refugees in this world that need help and to turn your backs on them. I think we all agree that's awful. It's a whole other thing to know that there are refugees in this country and in our neighborhood that need our help and be grateful that somebody else is doing something about it. And then it's another step to know that there are refugees who need some help and to be that help. That's the realignment that Jesus is talking about. That's what it means for the fig tree to produce fruit. That's what it looks like to not only repent, but to recommit ourselves into the right direction and to take steps toward that right direction. We're all, I think, pretty good at recognizing what's right and wrong. I think we're all pretty good at knowing that we want to be on the right side of things. But sometimes it just feels so intimidating to take a step in the right direction. So if it makes it any easier for you, please bombard Scott and don't let him leave the building with all of you trying to ask him what step you could take to help this Afghan refugee family. And he would be thrilled to be late to lunch because of this problem. And if it's not Scott, you can find me and then I can introduce you to Scott and make it his problem. Give me a plug, it goes back to you. That's how it's going to work. But here this morning from Luke 13, not some strange historical side quest. Don't hear from Luke 13 shame and guilt. I hope you find here an invitation to realign yourself with God's call for your life. That we can be a place to help you take those steps in the right direction in that realignment. If that's something that you want to talk about more, or if that's something that you want some prayers about, or if this is not a realignment, but a first-time alignment, you're trying to figure out what it is to give your life over to God, then the elders will be standing up in the back as we sing the next two songs. They would be more than happy to pray with you about these things, to discuss that with you.